After 20 years of experience as an industrial director in various types of industries, I created the Picomto solution with Sébastien Chevalier. That was a little over 10 years ago now. Picomto is a digital solution that allows you to capitalize on know-how and use it for training and support purposes, for production and maintenance operators. We realized that there were very few resources about the industry, 4.0, and that our clients had a lot of questions about their projects, a lot of questions about modern technologies like AI. So we decided to create this podcast simply to address these topics, with guests who can share their experiences with us.
Hello and welcome to PicomTalk, the podcast that gives a voice to the key players in today's and tomorrow's digital transformation. Today we're tackling an essential question, one that many clients ask us and that still holds back a lot of industrial companies. Why are there so many projects? According to various studies by major consulting firms such as BCG or McKinsey, only 30% of digital transformation projects fully achieve their objectives. This means that about 1 out of 3 projects does not deliver the expected results. Sometimes it's because they are stopped along the way, or sometimes because they don't generate enough value for the company in question. So today we're going to talk about what holds things back and how to overcome these obstacles to be part of that 1/3. To discuss this, I have the honor of welcoming today Emmanuel Toulisse, CEO of Picomto. Hello. Hello. And Quentin Berard, CEO of Shizen. Hello to you.
Hi.
So, can you explain to us in a few words who you are and above all, what your solutions do? Quentin.
So I am Quentin Berard, co-founder of Shizen. And what Shizen does is provide software for industry, mainly focused on daily rituals and routines. So team meetings, problem-solving sessions, and shop floor rounds. The goal is simply to help teams and factories communicate better, to improve their communication so they can solve more problems.
And you, Emmanuel?
Emmanuel Toulisse, I am the co-founder and CEO of Alliance, the company behind Picomto. Picomto is a solution for digitizing know-how. We provide our clients with a SaaS or on-premise platform depending on their needs, which allows them to digitize all of their know-how and based on this, to digitize their operations, both to train new hires and to assist them, and ultimately to accelerate the upskilling and ongoing competency of their various employees. Half of it is for maintenance, and the rest of our revenue comes from production.
Okay, thank you very much. So the first essential question, which will help us approach this topic easily. Why are there so many projects? In your opinion, what are the key factors behind Industry 4.0 projects? And based on your experiences, what are the most common obstacles you encounter, whether they are human, organizational, or technical?
The first reason is quite obvious, but it's the 4.0 projects that are launched just for the sake of doing 4.0 for the digital wow factor. We jump in, not really knowing what it's going to produce, but we want to go for it because we have a rather vague roadmap telling us to do so. That's pretty crazy, and it leads to failure.
Okay. And for you, Emmanuel, another point?
I agree with Quentin. We have a lot of innovation managers, factory managers at trade shows who come to see, who spot a pair of virtual reality glasses or another device that catches their eye. They say, this is going to be amazing in my workshop. But as a result, we really have a top-down approach, which means we don't really know what we're going to do with it. And we want to have it tested in the field. But when it doesn't bring any value, it's bound to fail.
Okay. And regarding the important human aspect, what do you have to say about that? How do you personally put people at the very center of what you do? I think you really do. But how do you approach this human factor, this human aspect in your projects?
So that's also a major factor for failure. We often see project teams with sponsors. We often see people who are either in methods or in different business sectors, but we often lack operators and we miss the voice from the field. It comes in, but it usually comes in quite late, actually, in the projects we implement. And it's true that there can be a difference between what the people on the ground expect and what, quite simply, the higher-ups expect. In fact, each manager of projects and then, quite simply, the internal sponsors. So that's an important point for us. And a key success factor is that often at our clients' companies, or at least when projects are being implemented, we don't have enough teams that are truly heterogeneous, including all levels of the company.
And that leads to another problem, which is that as a result, the people who are going to use our solutions may see it as just another burden, simply because we didn't take the time with them to look at what they would get out of it, how it would be useful to them in their daily work. So they start off a bit reluctantly, thinking here we go, another piece of software, and so on.
And yes, it's another burden.
Okay, so here we've talked about the organizational aspect, the human aspect. There would also be a third point to address, which is the technical aspect. What can you say about that? How does that manifest itself in the constraints you encounter on different projects?
On the technical side, it's also about, once again, having a heterogeneous team with all the departments of the company. We tend to want to use the eel strategy, meaning we try to avoid as much as possible and weave our way between the different departments. With our clients, for example, we're also in the pharmaceutical field. We try to avoid validation as much as possible, avoid GXP, avoid the IT department, and try to find fairly simple solutions when it comes to internal purchasing processes. And that, in the end, really tends to delay the project later on. When we actually manage, from a technical standpoint, to involve the IT department, which can ultimately become a real sponsor, then, if we manage to onboard them and help them understand the need, why in fact this solution is necessary or why this project is needed, we remove a number of barriers. We still have a lot of clients who realize that in the end, when you're in the defense sector, you need on-premise solutions. And then you end up choosing a solution that isn't, for example, or that can't be on-premise. Or simply, as I mentioned with pharma, a solution that needs to be CFR 21 Part 11 compliant because the clients deliver to the United States. If the solution isn't in any case, it will never be widely adopted in the field.
Okay, and on your side, Quentin?
For me, the point I see on the technical side is that there was a lack of expertise. On the industrial side, when it comes to APIs and interactions between software, everyone wants to have software that communicates with each other. Or we wanted to communicate with the ERP, with the MES. But actually, who handles the integration? There's rarely the expertise on the client side, and that can create obstacles. It can be intimidating. It can delay projects.
You're raising a good point as well regarding the technical aspect. I started with the team aspect, but the real point is that you don't build a house by starting with the attic. And if at some point you don't know whether you want 3 bedrooms or 4, or if you want a bay window, you don't start building a house. It's kind of the same thing, meaning you can't approach an Industry 4.0 project differently than you would any other project. When you set up a production line, you bring in raw materials to produce a finished product. There is real continuity. There absolutely has to be digital continuity from a technical standpoint as well. And it's true that today we tend not to think from the very beginning about a somewhat global architecture for what we want to implement for our industrial clients, and instead we just add pieces as we go along. Well, I experienced this myself when I renovated a house a few years ago. At some point you end up missing cables because you forgot to run them, and you do not have the RJ45 you wanted in the back room. And you have to find solutions, workarounds, let's say. It's the same in industry. If you haven't planned your architecture, you get overlaps. 2 solutions do the same thing. You have solutions that don't communicate with each other, and each department in the company keeps its own solutions without necessarily having true end-to-end digital continuity.
Okay, that's a good analogy with the house. And I think that I have one last question on this topic. Obstacle. Do you think this problem is only related to the French or even European industry? Or is it a global issue based on your experience?
First of all, these are obstacles. Yes, that we see in Industry of the Future projects, but also in any kind of transformation project. The fact that there's political misalignment, the lack of sponsors, the absence of concrete financial figures. Actually, all the obstacles we encounter are really just classic project hurdles. For us, half of our revenue comes from international business. We don't see any major differences from one country to another. The obstacles are more or less always the same.
Maybe afterwards we have perhaps a greater appetite for Industry 4.0, which can be a bit different, or maybe a slightly clearer vision because we're used to carrying out this kind of project, for example, in Germany. We do notice some minor cultural differences, but in reality the challenges are the same everywhere. Those who started earlier now have inevitably more mature solutions. We, on the other hand, are starting quite late, I think. I don't know if you agree with me, Quentin, but especially in this sector of activity, we have entire branches. So for us, we're in defense. We're talking about high intensity. There's the war in Ukraine. There's a real lag in digitalization, for example, in the defense industrial and technological base. And when you want to ramp up production and speed up development, it's a bit too late to implement this kind of
project. The BITD, can you explain what that is?
Yes, sorry. It's the technological base of the defense industry. So it's all the suppliers that simply enable our armed forces to equip themselves properly, to be able to respond. Earlier, I was talking about high intensity. So that's the ramping up a bit of the intensity of combat, and as a result, the intensity of needs. And then there are the conflicts that are happening right in our own backyard. This part is really important because in the end, we're asking people to accelerate very quickly. So there are plenty of other sectors where it's the same thing. It was the same in the pharmaceutical industry during COVID, in fact, we really have this issue and this real barrier of lagging behind, at least on the French and European scale.
So I think we've covered a lot of points, whether organizational, human, or technical. Do you see any other points, maybe issues that arise even at the very beginning of projects that actually slow down and block these industry projects? 4.0.
For us, the main cause, not of projects not being launched, but of project failure, which is actually quite rare, is when the manufacturer wants to digitize a process that doesn't exist in the first place. In our case, that's routines like AICs, team meetings. If nothing is defined, if there's no visual management, if they don't know which KPIs to track, jumping straight to digitalization isn't ideal. Some will say that it works just fine. It's about creating the steps. Yes, clearly. It's about creating the steps. And above all, it's like doing two projects in one. You're both setting up the process and digitizing it at the same time. And often they forget the first part. Whereas when the process already exists, even if it's not very mature, there's no problem. We can digitize, but we need to know where we're going.
Yes, absolutely. I think the point I see also really aligns with Quentin's. We really have an issue where we say we're implementing projects. Industry 4.0 is approached differently than we would with a machine. No one is going to go to a trade show and see an amazing machine and then say to yourself, hey, I'm going to buy it and put it in my factory to see what it brings. At some point, it's exactly the same with an Industry 4.0 project. At some point, you have to define what is it? What are my main pain points? Where does it hurt the most right now? What needs to be done right away? What is it going to be? My ROI, am I going to produce more? Am I going to have better quality for my customers? Will I improve my brand image in the market or simply reduce my costs? And then, am I able to measure the current situation? We have quite a few clients who really have the ability to measure, and we also have other clients who haven't yet taken that step to measure. And that's really an important prerequisite. We like to start with, pilot phase, I don't really like that term, but we do like to start industrialization gradually to make sure that at some point we clearly know what we want to achieve, that we have clear KPIs so we can track them. And to ask ourselves, what does success look like? If it turns out to be a success, it means I gain this much on this line. If I don't do it in one factory, if I don't do it in all my factories, I know exactly what I'm losing every day. That's really the key to making it a success.
I agree with you about the success objectives defined by our clients. Most of the time, they manage to be quite inventive in coming up with success objectives. So we tell them, okay, but where are we starting from? And that's when we never get an answer.
Exactly. And then at some point, there are sponsors who are going to sign checks because industrializing across 10 factories is not the same as doing it on a single line. And at some point, we need to have some leverage. And if we don't build that phase in right from the start, it's a recipe for failure.
Once these obstacles have been identified, once we've understood what the barriers to these industrial projects are, 4.0 projects, which according to your comments are based on startups, on small businesses rather than large groups, which in this case have trouble transforming themselves. In your opinion, how can we move forward differently? How can we move forward with a methodology, perhaps with an approach that using a set of best practices would help us avoid falling into the trap of creating a convoluted system?
First of all, to avoid creating a convoluted system, you need to start with simple projects. And for me, the simple projects to do quickly are the ones that will relieve a pain point that many people in the factory experience and experience all the time. We're not going to focus on something that only happens once in a blue moon and so on. No, for us, for example, it's everyone. The factory managers lose half an hour every day preparing for their meetings. Well, that's every day, it's everyone. There's no debate. We can solve it. It's very quick. It speaks to everyone. And as a result, we're able to get everyone on board with the topic.
I think that's an important point. Us too, when we arrive at our clients' sites, often if there was a big problem yesterday, that's the one that will stick in everyone's mind and that's the one we'll want to deal with right away. But if that problem only happens once every 3 years during a pilot phase, it's a bit complicated to look for KPIs and try to find ROI. We also really prefer projects that save a few minutes, many times throughout the day, rather than projects that save a few hours but only twice a year.
So that's a classic consulting practice, let's say impact effort matrix in correlation with frequency, which allows us to target a small pilot, a small use case that will let us create value quickly.
That's it for the
section methodology.
Absolutely. Actually, when it comes to implementation, that's really an important point. It's about asking ourselves how we're going to implement this project. The way we implement it, we have a team of industrial performance consultants. We see that when assisting our clients, we can't just limit ourselves to our role as a software provider, software. Clients need to be guided. They also need benchmarking to see what is being done elsewhere. They're transitioning from paper, and there are a lot of things to do, a lot of habits to change. Moving from paper to digital, doing things on paper is not the same as doing them digitally. We'll need to manage change for a new solution, quite simply, and we'll also face the obstacle of the entry barrier. That is to say, we have to deal with what already exists. We're talking about operating methods and procedures. What do we do with the 3,000 procedures we have in our group, and how do we work with them? We also have our share of responsibility in this to make it a success. It's also up to us to work on breaking down these entry barriers. We are currently working a lot on AI so that, for example, we can use AI to automatically create operating procedures from videos, to be able to convert PDFs or Word documents into Picomto type documents, for example. So our mission is also to help our clients break down these entry barriers and get out into the field very quickly. And that's what I always tell our clients. The project starts the moment an operator or technician has the solution in the field. And the upstream phases need to be reduced as much as possible.
In the same vein, we have a metric that we use internally called time to value. And actually, it's about how long it takes for my users to perceive the value of the software, and that needs to be compressed as much as possible. If we launch a project and 3 months later they still haven't understood the benefit, then it's pointless. So our job as product teams, client teams, and so on, is to make sure that users grasp the benefit as quickly as possible. And by the way, when you were talking about objectives, success, and so on. When we're dealing with clients it's starting to create a convoluted system. We're setting objectives for everyone, and quality goes here, and maintenance goes there, and so on. We like to challenge them a bit by saying, okay, what are we going to gain in 2 weeks? We deliberately force them into a very short time frame, almost too short, but it's to focus on what's essential. And then suddenly there's a consensus in the meeting. What can we achieve in 2 weeks? Well, we can go for this. And off we go. The project is launched, and then we'll see. Once we've had some initial successes, we'll see. But reducing this time to value.
That ties in a bit with this aspect. Yesterday we were discussing with a client on another topic, but this emotional aspect, meaning at some point celebrating. From the moment we manage to get very quick results, it really sticks. And we have this emotional aspect of victory, telling ourselves we've changed this. We didn't revolutionize the factories, but we changed this very quickly. Okay, it works. And so as a result, people will really take ownership of the solutions and consequently will simply go much further, adopting them much faster.
We've covered a lot of points. You talked about DIA, you talked about time to value. I wanted to bring up, I have 2 questions. The first question is about resources. When we say there's a lack of resources, it means there's a lack of skills on the client side. We have this expertise internally. We can't necessarily deploy it to all our clients because that would require a massive workforce that we simply don't have. How do you see it? What is it to you? What's your approach to allocating resources between large accounts, small accounts, and also industrial clients? And you...
Well, it's not necessarily the large accounts that are the most comfortable with this digital transformation. We actually see a lot of agility in smaller organizations as well. So for us as well, we try not to pit large corporations against startups. Both of us, by the way, are partners with Siemens, for example, which is a pretty major player. Hello, Olivier Rioux, by the way. This aspect is really an important point. We need each other. We have a lot of overlap with many Siemens solutions, but from time to time, and actually quite often, Siemens calls on us for specific issues because we have a slightly different perspective from theirs or a somewhat complementary vision. So first of all, the main thing is that we try not to set ourselves against each other. Everyone brings their own contribution to the table. And the aspect of collaboration between the different existing solutions as well as between large groups and small groups is a really important point. Then on our side, as we mentioned earlier, for this to be a success, the goal is to achieve the KPI. Whether we have multidisciplinary teams with people, field operators who have very simple needs every day and don't want something overly complicated, all the way to those who want results and know exactly what they're expecting in terms of ROI. That's really the key. Knowing what we want to do, knowing how to measure it, and having people from all backgrounds and all levels of the company involved. And the second point is indeed to have a quick implementation and simply being able to set very short-term and easily achievable goals.
On the AI side, just to make a quick aside, what do you think is the future of this tool in your processes and in this new approach you're trying to implement with your clients?
What is the future of AI? If you had asked us this question 3 years ago, I think we would have been unable to predict where we are now. So trying to say where we'll be in 5 years today, it's a bit tricky. But
how do you implement it in your processes? How do you try to manage all of that?
Basically, we look at the new technologies that come out, what needs they might address. And we're lucky to have clients who are very involved in our roadmap. So we talk with them every week about what we could do. And as a result, over time, we manage to identify use cases. As always, we start from a client need, definitely not from a tech push. And then the goal is to say, this is available, that's available, our clients need this, this, and that. Things that either we couldn't do before because the technology wasn't ready or because it was too complex, too expensive, and so on. Now, we jump on these opportunities. A very concrete example, in Shizen, we do problem solving. The issue with problem solving is asking yourself, okay, haven't we already solved this problem 12 months ago or 18 months ago? Historically, how do we go about finding that? You have to get into a kind of codification of the space to say, okay, it's in this subtype, that one, etc. No one does it, and if we just describe the problem in natural language, no one describes it the same way. One guy will say there's an oil leak, and another, he'll look a meter lower and say there's a grease stain. That's where AI will help us. The AI will say, hey guys, these are actually the same problem. Here's how you solved it 12 months ago. Here's what you can do today.
Especially in corrective maintenance.
Absolutely.
And predictive maintenance as well, actually.
But that's also an important point. At the beginning of the podcast, when we said not to do Industry 4.0 just for the sake of doing Industry 4.0, it's the same thing here. You shouldn't do AI just for the sake of doing AI. Everyone feels like they're behind. So there are also a lot of big companies, by the way, that are experimenting with integrating Copilot and Gemini into their environments without really knowing what the outcome will be. And then they readjust a bit afterwards. As for us, we really use it in two main areas. The first thing is the barrier to entry, meaning that today we have ways to break down barriers to entry very quickly. And the second thing is, what value does it bring to the end user? What value does it bring to the operator? Are we going to add a complicated system for them or not? We work a lot with agents, though we didn't call them that before, but the idea is at some point, how do we stack different AI algorithms to solve a problem for a client? We're very focused on execution, so we're really focused on doing things manually, since we're mostly dealing with manual processes. How can we effectively help the operator in their task? How can we retrieve elements related to problems that have already been solved within the solution? Shizen, for example, to notify the operator at the moment when an event is detected on the PLC, to immediately provide the right Picomto task, which draws on all the problem resolutions that Shizen has handled in the past, in order to instantly offer the correct solution, or at the very least to provide several options, each with a percentage or weight, to the operator. That's really an important point.
And you mentioned percentages, and actually, for me, you're pointing out the current limitation of AI, which is preventing its widespread adoption. It's going to suggest something that's very likely to be correct. And if it's not correct, it's kind of annoying. And the operator or team leader who in 3 months asks 3 questions, and then from time to time, if he gets bad results, he stops using AI. So for me, the area where AI needs to improve is exactly that. Reliability, not hallucinating, and so on.
That's exactly it. Actually, earlier we were talking about the work of stacking different algorithms and being able to make different algorithms work together. One of the algorithms we worked on, and which was also the most important and the hardest to get the AI to say, is, I don't know. And at some point, you have to be able to say, it's better not to give an answer than to give an answer you're not sure about. If today, for example, at one of our clients, Airbus, the idea is to say, I have an aluminum rivet of such and such diameter in front of me, at what pressure should I rivet it? That's easy. There are standards that exist, there are charts, so it's hard to make a mistake. On the other hand, if we're dealing with, I don't know, a PR that hasn't flowed properly, a sealant that hasn't flowed properly, or if we're looking at a scratch, for example, that's different because there could be various phenomena at play. Was it contaminated? The depth, the width? Yeah, real training is needed. At some point, you also have to remember that it's a tool and an assistant. It won't replace 20 years of experience. It simply won't replace the human eye. You haven't experienced it. Exactly. You have to be careful not to make mistakes. And that's a real point. It's about hallucinations and as a result, knowing how to say no. And so also knowing what you want to do and that it won't do everything. In any case, right away.
Okay, we got a little bit sidetracked while we were talking about artificial intelligence. I wanted us to take a moment to really illustrate a bit more of what you just mentioned with 2 or 3 specific concrete examples that you have already worked on during your various experiences. So who would like to start?
I have 2 client cases in mind. One with Toyota. I like to talk about it because, first of all, in our line of work, Toyota is kind of the holy grail. Why am I bringing this up? Because first, they had a very high level of operational maturity in these processes. So the failure point I mentioned was well under control, and they had strong digital maturity, but above all, great digital agility. That is, they have more resources than what you typically see elsewhere, both in IT, digital, and so on. And yet, when they started the project, their pitch to us was, we're beginners, we don't know how to do this, and you're going to have to guide us, guys. So together, we ended up doing some technically amazing things that are ahead of what a lot of other industrial companies are doing. So that's really great. And as for them, they're very mature. So the challenge is to save time for everyone so they can focus on problem solving and so on. Okay. Second client case, not exactly the opposite, but who am I going to talk about? Laboratoires Gilbert. Everything I'm saying is public. I'm not revealing any secrets. Laboratoires Gilbert hired us a few years ago because they had team rituals, but they weren't necessarily very mature yet, or at least they were inconsistent since they have several sites and the practices aren't exactly the same from one site to another, and they wanted to get started. So we got started, and the goal was very clear. It was simply to get everyone on the same page, to start streamlining everything, and to forget about the IT side of things. That is, Shizen wasn't connected to any software at all. So we were able to get started really quickly, and then people just entered the data manually, and it wasn't a problem. Actually, there was so much to gain that we didn't need something perfect at the start. And once it was up and running after 6 months to a year, and they started seeing results like being able to solve twice as many problems as before and so on, then they thought, well, maybe we should integrate the MES to save even more time and so on.
Brick by brick and step by step.
Yeah, but as a result, you have these 2 interesting aspects. There's no need to make it perfect from the start, okay?
This is certainly very interesting, without a doubt.
Among our clients, one example we often mention is SKF, which I personally think is an interesting case. So with Alain Boutet's teams, they really implemented the solution end-to-end with good agility. Today, they handle about 80% of onboarding at the workstation and in the sector with Picomto. They've installed terminals in the factory that allow operators to independently pick up a tablet, scan QR codes, and be guided through different elements, and to be able to have operating procedures that are also multimedia training modules guiding them step by step. What has this enabled? It has actually allowed all the somewhat repetitive tasks, or those that don't really add value, to be taken off the experts and technicians' plates, so they can really focus on the core skills and technical tasks. And where there is real added value, simply to spend more time on those aspects as well. So this is really a client for whom it's been a real success because it's been running for several years now. They're one of our oldest clients. And it's true that over time, they've added new use cases. They've added new training modules, new ways of doing things, but they've done it gradually. I have another client in mind, the Servier Laboratories, who are also one of our long-standing clients. For us, we've always said the main ROI is that they're in pharma, and they've gained the equivalent of 3 full-time positions in a plant with about 300 operators. We digitized all the processes for collecting signatures, making sure people properly acknowledge and sign, and that they properly take into account new operating methods, new procedures, and so on. And that has always been, whenever I talked about this client, that has always been the main ROI for me. And very recently, the methods teams told us, no, that's not our main ROI. For us, our main ROI is that on certain machines in the first factory we digitized, we realized we were able to capture the best way to perform center lining operations, changeovers, and so on. And that everyone applies the best method throughout the factory across the different teams. The morning and night teams operate in the same way. It's guided. Operators no longer have that fear of performing the operation at night because maintenance isn't there, because we really guide them. And as you know, Ali, every time we talk about the solution, I always say we need to explain this. A well-made operating procedure should be able to be carried out by a 10-year-old child who has never seen the machine before. Sometimes I even go as low as 5, but that's really the idea. So as a result, it simply helps and assists in carrying out these tasks continuously. And as a result, that's 6% OEE, which represents millions of euros per year that have been gained simply because we're applying the best method, which has been validated, digitized, and will be there for years to come. When we upgrade the machine, we'll also update the operating procedure. But in fact, we've captured and added value to the time we've spent creating this new version of the operating procedure.
What you're saying reminds me, on our side too, the easiest gain to quantify is how much time we've saved for managers and so on. But when we talk more in depth with clients, they say the same thing. The real benefit isn't that. The real benefit is that we're doing more problem solving. And actually, okay, we're solving problems, but what kind of problems are we solving? We're solving quality problems, we're solving safety problems, we're solving production issues, so we're going much further. And these are things, and we could talk about this, it's almost a whole other episode, it's about attributing ROI. Okay, we launched it, but did Shizen actually save 500,000? Well, actually, the factory improved by 3 points in performance. How much of that can we attribute to Shizen? So after that, it's all about calculations. I'll call them back-of-the-envelope calculations. Maybe that's not very nice, but you have to be considerate with the finance teams. You have to give them an ROI. They need it. But at the core, it still starts with a vision. That is, yes, we're going to save time, but the real thing we're aiming for is this. Can I put an exact number on it? Justify it precisely? Not necessarily, not always. And even so, it's not a big deal. You have to go for it. Lean or TPS, Kaizen, whatever you call it, you don't ask for an ROI every time. For example, when factories implemented daily team rituals, no one asked for the ROI of those rituals. Still, it's obvious, we do it. So here, it's kind of the same issue. Of course, you need ROI to make sure projects get started and so on. But we know that the real benefit isn't always quantifiable. It goes much further than that.
So maybe one last example that you had, Emmanuel, to share with us.
We have an example that I really like because earlier we were talking about startups, big companies and so on, which is really a bit of a collaboration between the two. We set up an R&D project for a French manufacturer of rolling mills and levelers called Redex. And here we really brought together a number of different skills. Siemens, which already automates the machines and is somewhat the project manager for this initiative. Diana Lees, which is really working on artificial intelligence for predictive maintenance. And then us for the operational procedures, assistance, and so on. And here there is real collaboration between 3 organizations of extremely different sizes to solve the problem of a French manufacturer who, as a result, wants to upgrade their machines and move forward and be able to bring solutions to Industry 4.0. On this aspect of working together, where everyone simply contributed their part, everyone shared everything we do today without being afraid of the other because we have a real collaboration. That's a really important point. I mentioned overlaps earlier. There can be some in our solutions, but here we managed to create value together. The end client, for their part, sees maximum value. That's also very important. It's that companies like ours need to talk to each other and provide joint solutions. Often Quentin calls me because he has complementary issues where quite simply we can help. And we did that not very long ago as well with clients who either don't need our product because in the end, they have a different need. And so Quentin will be able to respond better than we can. And this collaborative aspect, and this aspect where we all work together, once again, to ensure this digital continuity is extremely important. And it's all the more important because our major competitors who have big solutions, let's take the Americans, for example, PTC, their strength is to say, wait, don't bother with Shizen, Picomto, etc. We do everything. We handle everything from end to end. You'll have digital continuity if you write a check and adopt our solution as a whole. individually, the solutions, they don't go as far as what we do. We can say it because we're specialists, we're experts, and we don't do any problem solving at all. And I don't think Quentin does operating procedures. And that's really the important aspect, that we're going to be experts. But if we're experts who each work in our own corner, then we lose that digital continuity and we lose a certain value for the client. So this collaborative aspect, large groups, our companies working together and truly working jointly for the client, is a very important point and is the real driver of ROI, where the client gets solutions that are technologically mature, digital continuity, and agile teams. He gets everything he could want.
I have one last, somewhat surprising question for you, Quentin. Is it difficult to recruit industry experts in young startups like yours? For example, someone like Emmanuel Pelletre. Personally, I find that quite rare. What do you think about that?
It's not that complicated. We're lucky because it's generational. I couldn't really explain it. But it's true that for us, it's part of our DNA, our positioning in relation to the market and our peers. Our client teams are made up only of people who have already worked in factories, who have already been in production, in continuous improvement, and so on. And that there are probably plenty of people out there with 3, 5, or 8 years of experience in factories who love the industry, but for certain constraints or reasons want to leave the industry and move more into tech, into 4.0, but still have a real passion for the industry. So we don't necessarily have a specific recruitment process for that. I don't know about your side.
I would add a bit of nuance to that. It's true that it's sometimes difficult to find people who have both the interest or the willingness to move towards the profession and towards lean, simply put, or who are really interested in factory problems and at the same time have an appetite for digital. I also find from time to time, and maybe I sound like an old timer now, but I am sometimes quite surprised by the lack of digital interest among people who are engineers, line workers, etc., who are just graduating now or who graduated very recently. From time to time, as we were talking about AI earlier, there's this openness to AI tools, simply being open to these tools and realizing that they're going to be our teammates and not, in quotes, replace us. I find that quite often this is somewhat lacking, and that in the training of engineers, not to speak for all schools and all engineers, but that aspect is a bit lacking. We're a bit behind in France. We're still stuck in the 1980s when it comes to training our engineers.
I'm a generalist engineer, so I'm speaking from my own experience. We've touched on everything, and that's a very good thing.
Thank you for these concrete examples and this little digression on the topic of recruiting and training the engineers of tomorrow. We've touched on points that are different, but at the same time very complementary. Do you think that for projects like this, we should place the important economic question really at the center? Let me explain. In these projects, have you noticed, Quentin, you mentioned it earlier, that the distribution and understanding of the benefits, the value of Shizen, is sometimes hard to quantify? More broadly, what do these projects bring beyond simple productivity?
Earlier, you asked a question about AI. I said that 3 years ago, we would have been unable to predict where we are today, and in 5 years, it will be even harder. In any case, software and AI revolve around data. So even today, that's the key. I can't even imagine how important data will be in 5 years. It's going to be important. So start capitalizing, start collecting as much data as possible. Because data is gold, and that's not really a short-term gain, but it's going to become essential as time goes on. Industrial companies are actually pretty well equipped to capture process data. Okay, we produced this many things, it was at these temperatures, etc. But everything else is a bit mysterious. The data more related to people, the methods we use, what the best practices are, how often we actually apply them, audits, whether we're doing well, whether we're meeting for the right reasons, and so on. So it's a whole set of data that had never been captured until now, and that as technology advances will have to be increasingly leveraged. So go ahead, start capturing it now.
Just on that point, our clients often tell us that tracking data sometimes also means tracking people, and sometimes it means tracking things that some people don't understand. What's your point of view on that? how do you properly distinguish between tracking data to be more productive while at the same time maintaining respect for people, respecting confidentiality and all those issues?
First of all, when it comes to tracking, I think there are a whole set of laws and regulations that already exist. The real issue is how the data is used. It's about what we do with that data. Let me give you an example. We have a product at Shizen called the Vitality Center, which is designed to show to what extent people and teams are engaging in the continuous improvement process. We made a choice. This dashboard is only available at the team level. We can't drill down to the individual level. It's only at the team level. And after that, we're all in the same boat and so on. But these are managerial and team choices.
Specific to each.
Right. If someone wants to do whatever they want, they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, exactly. But there are still two things. For decades now, people have been signing papers, signing reports, signing certificates. And we have two different things. There's the data we track in order to enable continuous improvement, where we track what we call passive data and active data. Passive data is about who did what, at what time, how the teams work together, and so on. This kind of data doesn't need to be nominative because the goal is continuous improvement. The idea is to find out where things are falling short and at some point how we can improve all of that a bit. And then we have what we call active data, which are checklist data, things we answer, where there's an electronic signature. Because at some point when we're working, our document will be added to what's called an electronic batch record and will follow a batch of medication. We need this because it involves the responsibility of the people involved. When a plane comes off a production line, there's a whole validation chain as well to know who did what. Because in the event of an accident, there's an element of responsibility, but also an aspect of analysis. So I think we have plenty of ways to anonymize different types of data. We have the same issue between clients. At the scale of an industry, we can implement continuous improvement. But if I'm Arcelor or Solvay, I might not want to share my settings with my competitor. But at the industry level, for example, when we're in the same country, we can also pool anonymized data simply to enable continuous improvement on a broader scale. There?
It was a CMMS that did that, right? What was it called?
So yes, there was a kind of a community-based CMMS, sort of like the Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat.
All the teams now, regardless of the company, were together.
That's right, exactly where they could. These are activities that don't work. For example, we work with machine manufacturers. We're partnered with a very large machine manufacturer in the Canadian pharmaceutical industry. We also work with Redex. It's the same. There are clients who want to be closed off. So these clients who want to be closed off to keep their data and not share it, they simply don't get the benefit of others' data either. But at the same time, for those who want to share, it simply allows them to do things together. It's a bit the same for us. We like to have user groups, so to speak, in pharma and in aerospace. And there are people who are competitors, directly or indirectly, but who still share things because in pharma, it's quite strong since ultimately human safety is at stake. So people share best practices because in the end, it's everyone's safety that's involved. So it's true that they're used to this approach. There are sectors like automotive, perhaps, or sectors that are under a lot of margin pressure. It's more complicated.
Okay. Maybe there are other points specifically about to what extent can these projects go beyond simple productivity?
I think there's an important point, which is the human factor. But in aerospace, on the other hand, we talk a lot about the human factor. There is a huge focus on the human factor and on quality aspects, but there's also the motivation aspect. As we mentioned earlier with Quentin, these Industry 4.0 projects, when implemented properly, can quickly lead to successes, and you can quickly see trends reversing. TRS curves, quality curves, scrap curves. It can happen quite quickly. There really is this personal satisfaction among our clients, the maintenance operators, the production operators. For the most part, they come in the morning wanting to do a good job. They don't want to make products that aren't high quality or products with problems. So for them, there really is also this reward, which isn't a financial reward, but simply allows them to say, okay, I'm contributing to improving what my company does and I'm helping to improve my own work. That's why, for me, it's really important that operators and maintenance technicians are involved very early on in the projects. And the second point is also attractiveness. Today, quite simply, if when you get out of school, you're given paper binders and checklists to fill out by hand all day long, it might be a bit difficult when at home you use your voice to open your garage door. You're always on your smartphone and so on. So this aspect of attractiveness, which we often see with our clients, is not necessarily their primary motivation, but it actually draws in young people. Maintenance isn't very sexy. We have quite a few clients who use smart glasses instead of Android tablets so they can keep their hands free and use voice commands. Being able to say, in my company, in maintenance, you'll be using this kind of device or tablets every day, etc. That creates a kind of attractiveness and differentiation compared to what others are doing. This is actually a pretty strong point, especially in sectors like maintenance, which aren't very appealing to young people.
Are we talking about gamification in particular?
That's right, exactly. We're talking about gamification, but more importantly, we're talking about using the same things we use all day long. Today, if I took away your smartphone and gave you a Nokia from my time, back when we first started with mobile phones, it would be tough. So there's no reason we should do that at work and tell you, go check that cabinet over there. Maybe you'll manage to find the problem you had 2 years ago, or the operating procedure you need to analyze because it's 4 pages of text while you're standing in front of your machine, and you'll never find where you're supposed to act or what you're supposed to do when it might just be 5 seconds on a sensor.
The first times you set foot in a factory, it feels strange. People have these 33.10S, the AS400 software. It looks like nothing. That's right. You think to yourself, what happened here? Why is it stuck in time?
Because it works. And it's always worked like that.
Because it's about change management. It's hard to change, but then when you start, there's also obsolescence. When you have to start installing power supplies from a DX400 from 20 years ago, because if you can't find the power supply anymore, it's gone, and my software that runs my CNC machine doesn't work anymore, that's a real problem. And when it's too late, it's too late. Unfortunately, the investments are substantial, and that's where we face real productivity issues.
Thank you for sharing your insights. I think we've covered a lot of points that will really help and enlighten many of our listeners. To recap, the main obstacles often remain human, organizational, and technical, especially, as we just mentioned, the tendency for large companies to stick with rather outdated models. So, what's the right approach? It involves identifying the real pain points, testing with a short pilot, and gradually scaling up, all while maintaining collaboration between large corporations, industrial startups, and of course, all the stakeholders from both major parties. Finally, we talked about AI, and we could come back to that in a future episode. Indeed, it will play an increasingly important and major role in our practices, but keep in mind that it will always remain at the service of the integrated operator with a clear and pragmatic vision, as Quentin and Emmanuel have expressed. To wrap up, Emmanuel and Quentin, do you have a topic in mind for the next episode? And one last word for our listeners?
Well, I think the topic of AI will be an important one, and we'll revisit it in a future podcast because there are still a lot of people who have questions. There are a lot of initiatives, and then there's the issue of data sovereignty. Am I going to send my content to OpenAI servers or Google's or somewhere else? Am I going to lose some of my know-how? It's a real issue, and we could talk about it for a long time. I think it will be a topic for a future podcast. It's really an important point. If I wanted to wrap up this podcast, it would be that thank you, Quentin, first of all, because it was really interesting to have 2 different perspectives since we don't have the same barriers to entry. We often work together, but we're in sectors that are very close, yet still quite different. So it's really interesting to compare these ideas a bit. And to sum it up for me, to implement an Industry 4.0 project, do exactly what you do when you change a machine. In other words, it's exactly the same process. You ask yourself the right questions, you consider the ROI. The users of the machine are often involved from the very beginning. You need to do exactly the same thing for digital projects.
Quentin, our first guest.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Really cool discussion. And my conclusion is pretty much the same. Actually, you already know how to do projects like this. It's not rocket science. And actually, when we talk to clients afterwards, they say they made a mountain out of a molehill for nothing. So go for it. Start simple, start small. Grow as you go along. But it's not rocket science in any way. At some point, you're going to have to do it.
That's an important point. I think the conclusion could apply to all our clients. I think we're aware of that. It's not a question of whether one day I'll go digital or embrace Industry 4.0. The real question is when. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Quentin. You were listening to PicomTalk, the podcast that gives a voice to the players in today's and tomorrow's digital transformation. See you next time for another episode.